Margaret Williams clutched her shawl tightly around her shoulders as the stagecoach rattled along the dusty trail toward Willow Creek, Colorado territory. The year was 1875, and everything she owned in the world was packed into the modest trunk beneath her feet. The advertisement that had brought her thousands of miles from Boston to this wild frontier had promised a good man, a comfortable home, and a new beginning, exactly what a 22-year-old orphan seamstress with dwindling prospects needed. "Almost there, miss," the driver called down, his voice barely audible over the creaking wheels and pounding hooves. "Willow Creek's just beyond that ridge." Margaret peered through the dust-streaked window at the vast expanse of prairie, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional twisted tree. The Rockies loomed in the distance, purple and imposing against the clear blue sky. Nothing like the crowded streets of Boston where she'd spent her entire life. A flutter of nervousness rippled through her stomach. She'd never met Vernon Miller, her husband-to-be, but his letters had seemed kind enough. He described himself as a successful businessman with a fine house in town, looking for a proper Eastern wife to share his prosperity. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of what appeared to be the town's main street, a dusty thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings in various states of repair. A handful of horses were hitched outside a saloon, and a few townspeople moved along the boardwalks with purpose. "Willow Creek," the driver announced, jumping down to help with her trunk. Margaret smoothed her travel-worn dress and adjusted her bonnet before descending from the coach. She had expected Vernon to be waiting, perhaps with flowers, certainly with a smile. But as she scanned the faces of the few onlookers, she saw no one stepping forward to claim her. "Excuse me," she asked the driver. "Is there perhaps another stop in town?" The grizzled man shook his head.
"This is it, madam.
Willow Creek ain't big enough for two stops." A heavy-set woman with a kind face approached from the general store. "You must be Vernon Miller's bride," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Edith Parker. Vernon asked me to meet you and take you to his place." Relief washed over Margaret. "Yes, thank you. I'm Margaret Williams, soon to be Miller, I suppose." She smiled, though her nerves hadn't settled. "Is Mr. Miller detained with business?" Something flickered across Edith's face, pity, perhaps, but it was gone so quickly that Margaret thought she might have imagined it. "Vernon's. Well, he's got a place just outside of town. I'll take you there." The wagon ride was short but bumpy, and with each passing minute, the buildings of town grew more distant. Edith wasn't particularly talkative, responding to Margaret's questions about Vernon with vague, non-committal answers. They turned onto a narrow dirt path that led to a small, dilapidated cabin with a sagging roof and broken porch steps. "There must be some mistake," Margaret said, her voice barely a whisper as Edith brought the wagon to a halt.
"No mistake, dear.
This is Vernon's place." The door to the cabin swung open, and a man stepped out unshaven, unkempt, and at least 20 years older than the 40 years he'd claimed in his letters. His threadbare clothes reeked of whiskey even from a distance. "So you're the one," he said, eyes raking over her in a way that made Margaret's skin crawl. "Prettier than I expected. Get on in here and start earning your keep." Margaret's heart pounded in her chest. "Mr. Miller, there seems to be some confusion. Your letters described—" "I know what my letters said," he cut her off with a dismissive wave. "You think a woman like you deserves the truth? I paid good money to bring you out here. Now get inside." Edith gave Margaret's arm a sympathetic squeeze. "I'm sorry, dear. I would take you in, but my husband wouldn't allow it. Vernon's got debts all over town. This is how he's living now." "You knew?" Margaret asked, feeling betrayed twice over. "Everyone knows," Edith admitted. "But no one stops these arrangements. Too many men out here need wives, by whatever means." Vernon stumbled down the steps, grabbing Margaret's arm roughly. "Thank you, Edith. I've got my bride now." Margaret pulled away. "I will not be staying here. This is not what was agreed upon." Vernon's face darkened. You'll stay. I paid your passage. You're mine now, by law. Actually, that ain't exactly true. The new voice came from behind them. Margaret turned to see a tall man on horseback, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He dismounted with easy grace, revealing broad shoulders and a lean frame clad in worn denim and leather. When he stepped forward, she could see his face clearly weathered from the sun but handsome, with clear blue eyes that met hers briefly before focusing on Vernon. Mail order contracts aren't binding until there's a proper ceremony, the stranger continued. Lady hasn't married you yet, Miller. Vernon spat on the ground. Stay out of it, Clayton. This ain't your business. Making it my business. The man Clayton rested his hand casually on his holstered pistol. Miss, I'm Cole Clayton. Ranch a few miles north. If you're looking for alternative arrangements, I'd be happy to escort you back to town. Margaret hesitated. Trading one unknown man for another hardly seemed prudent, but something in Cole Clayton's steady gaze gave her courage. He wasn't looking at her the way Vernon had, like she was property. Vernon stepped forward menacingly. She cost me $50. I'll reimburse your expenses, Cole said evenly. Though I reckon your lies cost the lady considerably more. Margaret found her voice. I have some money of my own. I can repay whatever is necessary to be released from this arrangement. Vernon looked from Cole to Margaret, seeming to calculate his odds. Finally, he cursed under his breath.
Fine. $50 and she can go.
But I want it now. Cole reached into his pocket and counted out the money, without hesitation. Consider your contract voided. Vernon snatched the bills, muttering obscenities as he retreated into his cabin, slamming the door behind him. Thank you, Mr. Clayton, Margaret said, her voice steadier than she felt. I don't know what I would have done. Call me Cole, he replied, tipping his hat. And there's no need for thanks. No decent man would leave a lady in that situation. He turned to Edith. Mrs. Parker, would you be willing to drive Miss Williams back to town? I'll follow to make sure you both arrive safely. Edith nodded, looking relieved. Of course. I know the boarding house has a room available. As they headed back toward town, Margaret found herself watching Cole Clayton as he rode alongside the wagon. He'd appeared just when she needed help most, like some knight from the storybooks she'd read as a child. But this was the Wild West, not a fairy tale, and Margaret knew better than to trust too quickly again. Little did she know that this chance encounter would change the course of her life forever. The boarding house was a tidy two-story building run by a widow named Mrs. Hollister, who took one look at Margaret's tear-stained face and ushered her inside without asking too many questions. Cole paid for a week's lodging despite Margaret's protests that she could manage her own expenses. Consider it an apology on behalf of Willow Creek, he said. Not everyone here is like Miller. Will he cause trouble? Margaret asked, suddenly concerned about repercussions. Vernon's all talk when he's sober, and too drunk to act when he's not, Cole assured her. But if he bothers you, send word to the Clayton Ranch. He hesitated, then added, Miss Williams, I don't mean to pry, but do you have plans now that your original arrangement has fallen through? Margaret sighed, the full weight of her situation settling on her shoulders. I need to find work. I'm a skilled seamstress. Perhaps there's a shop in town that could use my services. Willow Creek small, but growing. People here could use good tailoring. He seemed about to say more, but simply tipped his hat instead. Good evening, Miss Williams. I hope Willow Creek treats you better from here on out. Over the next several days, Margaret learned that Cole Clayton was right about Willow Creek needing a seamstress. Mrs. Hollister spread the word, and soon Margaret had enough mending and alteration work to keep her busy. She converted a corner of her small room into a workspace, grateful for the chance to use her skills. She also learned more about Cole Clayton from town gossip. He ran one of the larger cattle ranches in the area with his younger brother and was known as a fair employer and an honest businessman. Unlike many ranchers, he treated the local Native American tribes with respect and had even helped negotiate peaceful agreements over land disputes. His wife had died in childbirth 5 years earlier, along with their infant son, and he hadn't courted anyone since. A week after her arrival, Margaret was returning from delivering a mended shirt to the general store when she spotted Cole tying his horse outside the town's only restaurant. He saw her at the same moment and crossed the street to greet her. "Miss Williams, good to see you settling in." His smile reached his eyes, creating small crinkles at the corners. "Mr. Clayton Cole," she corrected herself. "Yes, thanks to your help, I've found some work. Mrs. Hollister has been kind enough to let me set up a small sewing area in my room." "I'm glad to hear it." He glanced at the restaurant, then back to her. "I was about to have some lunch. Would you care to join me? The stew here is actually quite good." Margaret hesitated. In Boston, such an invitation from a man she barely knew would be scandalous. But Willow Creek operated under different social rules, and she was hungry. "That would be nice, thank you." The restaurant was simple but clean, with several tables occupied by townspeople who nodded respectfully to Cole. They found a table by the window, and Cole pulled out her chair before taking his own seat. "I hear you've been busy," he said after they'd ordered. "Mrs. Parker showed me the dress you altered for her daughter. Fine work." "Thank you. I was apprenticed to a dressmaker in Boston from the time I was 14. She paused, then decided honesty was best. "May I ask why you helped me that day?"
You didn't know me.
Cole considered this, his blue eyes thoughtful. "My mother came west as a mail order bride. My father was a good man who kept his promises, but she told me stories of other women who weren't so fortunate." He shrugged slightly. "I suppose I was honoring her memory. Your mother was very lucky." "Yes, she was. Though she claimed it was my father who got the better deal." A hint of mischief played at the corners of his mouth. "What brought you to answer Vernon's advertisement?" Margaret traced the edge of her water glass with one finger. "My parents died of influenza when I was 18. I continued working for Mrs. Teasdale, the dressmaker, but she passed away last year. Her nephew took over the business and—" She hesitated. He made it clear that my continued employment would require additional duties I wasn't willing to perform. Cole's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded in understanding. "So you looked west?"
Yes.
"I had saved some money, but Boston is expensive." The advertisement promised a respectable businessman with a proper home. It seemed like divine providence. "I'm sorry it didn't turn out that way." Their food arrived, interrupting the conversation. The stew was indeed good, rich with chunks of beef and vegetables. As they ate, Margaret found herself relaxing in Cole's company. He told her about his ranch, his herd of Herefords, and his brother Matthew, who handled most of the business affairs. "You should come out to the ranch sometime," he said as they finished their meal. "We're having a small gathering next weekend to celebrate the end of branding season. Nothing fancy, just some food and music. You'd be welcome." "I couldn't impose, it's no imposition. You'd be doing me a favor, actually. My housekeeper, Mrs. Gunderson, is always saying we need more civilizing influences at our events." His smile was warm. "Besides, you might drum up some business. Plenty of cowboys with torn shirts and missing buttons." Margaret found herself smiling back. "Well, when you put it that way, perhaps I will." As Cole walked her back to the boarding house, Margaret realized this was the first time since arriving in Willow Creek that she'd felt truly at ease. Something about Cole Clayton inspired confidence, a steadiness that made her feel safe in his presence. "Thank you for lunch," she said when they reached Mrs. Hollister's front porch. "It was very kind of you." "My pleasure." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "Miss Williams, I want you to know that I have no expectations beyond friendship. I understand your experience with Vernon might make you wary of men's intentions out here." Margaret appreciated his directness. Thank you for saying so. And please call me Margaret. Margaret. He nodded, a smile warming his features. I'll send word about the gathering next weekend. If you decide to come, I can arrange transportation. As she watched him walk back to his horse, Margaret felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her recent ordeal. Cole Clayton was unlike any man she'd met before, straightforward, kind, and respectful. For the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, she wondered if coming west might not be a mistake after all. The following week passed quickly for Margaret. Word of her sewing skills spread, and she soon had more work than she could handle in the small confines of her boarding house room. Mrs. Hollister, seeing an opportunity, offered Margaret the use of a vacant room on the ground floor as a proper shop, in exchange for a small percentage of her earnings. It's sitting empty anyway, the older woman said with a practical shrug. Might as well be put to good use. Margaret gratefully accepted and spent several days cleaning and organizing the space. She hung a simple sign in the window, Williams Dressmaking and Alterations, and officially opened for business. On Friday afternoon, as she was finishing a particularly delicate repair on the mayor's wife's Sunday dress, the bell above her door jingled. She looked up to see Cole standing in the doorway, hat in hand. Your shop looks proper and professional, he said, glancing around appreciatively at the neat shelves of fabric and the dress form she'd splurged on. Business going well? Better than I could have hoped, Margaret admitted, setting aside her needle. Did you come for mending? Actually, I came to remind you about tomorrow's gathering. And to offer transportation, if you're still interested in attending. Margaret had thought about little else all week. Yes, I'd like that. What time should I be ready? I'll come for you around noon, if that suits. It's about an hour's ride to the ranch. Noon is perfect. Should I bring anything? Cole shook his head. Just yourself. He glanced at the nearly completed dress. And maybe wear something nice. Not that you don't always look. He cleared his throat. What I mean is, there'll be dancing later. Margaret tried not to smile at his discomfort. For all his confidence, Cole Clayton apparently got flustered when discussing ladies' attire. Dancing sounds lovely. I'll be ready at noon. After he left, Margaret found herself spending an undue amount of time deciding what to wear. She finally settled on her best dress, a deep blue cotton with a subtle floral pattern that complemented her eyes. She had made it herself during her final months in Boston, saving scraps of the expensive fabric from Mrs. Teasdale's shop. The next day, Cole arrived promptly at noon, driving a smart buggy rather than riding horseback. He was dressed in clean denims, a crisp white shirt, and a vest that showed off his broad shoulders. His usually wind-tousled brown hair was neatly combed, and he'd clearly taken extra care with his appearance. You look beautiful, he said simply as he helped her into the buggy. Thank you. Margaret smoothed her skirts, oddly pleased by the compliment. You clean up rather well yourself. The drive to the Clayton Ranch took them through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers. Cole pointed out landmarks along the way, a creek where he'd fished as a boy, a stand of cottonwoods that marked the boundary of his property, distant mountain peaks with names she tried to memorize. There it is, he said finally, gesturing toward a large, well-maintained ranch house nestled in a valley. Several outbuildings surrounded it, and a corral held a dozen or so horses. Smoke rose from a pit where men were clearly preparing food, and wagons were already parked in a neat row. It's lovely, Margaret said, genuinely impressed. The Clayton Ranch was clearly prosperous, far more substantial than she had imagined. As they approached, a man who strongly resembled Cole strode out to meet them. Slightly younger but with the same tall build and direct gaze, he grinned broadly as Cole brought the buggy to a stop. About time you arrived, he called. Mrs. Gunderson's been fussing over the food for hours. Cole helped Margaret down from the buggy. Margaret Williams, my brother Matthew Clayton. Matt, Miss Williams is the new seamstress in town I told you about. Matthew took her offered hand. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Williams. Cole's spoken highly of your skills. Has he? Margaret glanced at Cole, who suddenly seemed very interested in tying the reins. Indeed. Said your stitching was the finest he's seen. Matthew's eyes twinkled with mischief, though he may have mentioned other qualities as well. Matt. Cole's tone held a warning. Matthew laughed. Come on in, Miss Williams. Let me introduce you to the others. The afternoon passed pleasantly. The Clayton brothers employed about a dozen cowboys, most of whom were present with their families. Mrs. Gunderson, the housekeeper, was a robust Norwegian woman who had clearly taken charge of the food arrangements. A fiddler and a man with a guitar provided music, though the dancing wouldn't start until after the meal. Margaret found herself enjoying the easy camaraderie of the gathering. These were hard-working people who knew how to appreciate a day of leisure. Several of the women approached her about sewing work, and she promised to fit them into her schedule. As the sun began its descent, the food was served: tender beef, beans, cornbread, and fresh vegetables from Mrs. Gunderson's garden. Margaret sat at a long table between Cole and an elderly ranch hand named Hank, who entertained her with stories of the early days of the territory. Cole's daddy was one of the first to settle this valley, Hank told her, spooning more beans onto his plate. Smart man, saw the potential. Cole's got the same eye for good land and good cattle. The ranch seems very successful, Margaret observed. It is now. Wasn't always. After their folks passed fever took, and both the same week Cole was barely 21. Matt just a teenager. Lot of folks thought they'd lose the place. Hank nodded toward Cole, who was deep in conversation with a neighboring rancher. But that boy worked dawn to dusk, paid off debts, built up the herd. Never complained, never asked for help though plenty offered. As twilight settled over the ranch, lanterns were lit, and the musicians struck up a livelier tune. Couples began to gather for dancing on a flat area near the barn. May I have this dance? Cole appeared at Margaret's side, extending his hand. I'd be delighted. She placed her hand in his, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work. Cole proved to be a surprisingly graceful dancer, guiding her confidently through the steps of a waltz. Margaret was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the way his eyes never left hers. You're very light on your feet, Mr. Clayton, she said as they moved together. My mother insisted we learn properly. Said no son of hers would clod around a dance floor like a startled bear. Margaret laughed. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. His expression softened with memory. I think she would have liked you. The simple statement warmed Margaret more than it should have. As they continued to dance, she realized how comfortable she felt in Cole's arms, as if they had danced together many times before. When the music ended, he didn't immediately release her hand. Would you like to see the rest of the ranch? He asked. There's a particular spot I think you might enjoy, especially at sunset. Margaret nodded, and Cole led her away from the celebration, down a well-worn path that wound along a small stream. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a gentle rise topped by a single massive oak tree. From this vantage point, they could see the entire valley, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. It's breathtaking, Margaret whispered, afraid to break the spell of the moment. This is my thinking spot, Cole admitted. When decisions need making or troubles need sorting, I come here. I can see why. It feels peaceful. Cole turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. Margaret, I know you haven't been in Willow Creek long, and after what happened with Miller, you've every right to be cautious. But I want you to know that I've come to admire you greatly. Margaret's heart quickened. Cole, you don't need to say anything, he assured her. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I just wanted you to know that if you ever need anything at all, I'm here. In that moment, with the sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Margaret did something she hadn't planned. She reached up and touched Cole's face gently. Thank you, she said softly. That means more than I can express. The look in his eyes nearly took her breath away, warmth, admiration, and something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her and realized with some surprise that she wanted him to. Instead, he covered her hand with his own, pressing it briefly against his cheek before releasing it. "We should get back," he said, his voice slightly rough. "People will wonder where we've gone." As they walked back toward the celebration, Margaret's mind was whirling. She had come west expecting one life and found another entirely. And now, after just a few weeks in Willow Creek, she was developing feelings for a man she barely knew yet somehow felt she'd known forever. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, like standing at the edge of a beautiful precipice, unsure whether to step back or leap forward into the unknown. The gathering continued well into the evening, with more dancing and storytelling around a bonfire. Margaret met most of the neighboring ranchers and their families, all of whom welcomed her warmly. By the time Cole drove her back to town, the stars were blazing in the clear night sky. "Thank you for inviting me," she said as they pulled up in front of the boarding house. "I had a wonderful time." "I'm glad." Cole hesitated. "I'll be in town on Tuesday for supplies. Perhaps we could have lunch again." "I'd like that." He helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering slightly at her waist. "Good night, Margaret." "Good night, Cole." As she watched him drive away, Margaret felt a curious mixture of excitement and caution. Cole Clayton was everything Vernon Miller had falsely claimed to be: successful, respected, kind. But she had been deceived once, and the memory of that betrayal still stung. Could she trust her judgment so soon after such a bitter lesson? Yet as she prepared for bed, Margaret couldn't deny the way her pulse quickened when she thought of Cole's smile, or the sense of safety she felt in his presence. Perhaps, she thought as she drifted off to sleep, some risks were worth taking. Over the next few weeks, Margaret's business thrived. She expanded her services beyond mending and alterations to include custom dressmaking, and even hired a young girl named Sarah to help with simpler tasks. Her little shop became something of a social hub, where women gathered to exchange news while having fittings or selecting fabrics. Cole came into town regularly, and they fell into a pattern of having lunch together on his supply days. Sometimes they would walk afterward, exploring the growing town or simply enjoying each other's company. Margaret learned about his daily life on the ranch, his hopes for expanding his herd, his concerns about the changing territory as more settlers arrived. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her parents, her dreams of someday having her own dress shop. Their friendship deepened with each meeting, and Margaret found herself looking forward to Tuesdays with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. Cole was unfailingly respectful, never presuming more than she offered, yet she could sense his growing feelings in the way his eyes followed her movements, the slight catch in his voice when he said her name. One Tuesday in late June, Cole arrived at her shop looking unusually serious. "Is something wrong?" Margaret asked as they walked to the restaurant. "Not wrong, exactly." He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "There's trouble brewing with a group of homesteaders who've settled on open range to the north. They're fencing land that's traditionally been used for cattle drives." "Is that affecting your ranch?" "Not directly, not yet. But some of the other ranchers are talking about taking matters into their own hands. There's a meeting tonight." He sighed heavily. "The last thing this territory needs is violence between ranchers and farmers." "What will you do?" "Try to find a compromise. The territory's changing, we all know that. There's room for both cattle and crops if people are reasonable." He glanced at her. "I may need to stay in town overnight for this meeting. Would you have dinner with me this evening?" Margaret hesitated only briefly. "Yes, I'd like that." The restaurant was crowded that evening, filled with ranchers who had come to town for the meeting. Cole and Margaret found a table in a quiet corner, away from the main group. "I'm sorry about the crowd," Cole said as they settled in. "This isn't quite what I had in mind." It's fine, Margaret assured him. I understand this is important business. Throughout the meal, various men stopped by their table to speak with Cole, seeking his opinion or sharing information. Margaret observed how they deferred to him, not because of his size or strength, but because of his reputation for fairness and level-headedness. You have a lot of influence, she remarked after a particularly respectful consultation. Cole shrugged. People know I don't have a personal stake in this particular dispute. My land isn't affected by these homesteaders. It's more than that. They trust your judgment. He looked slightly uncomfortable with the praise. I just try to see all sides of an issue. My father taught me that most problems have more than one solution if you're willing to look for them. As they finished their meal, the restaurant began to empty as men headed toward the town hall for the meeting. Cole glanced at the large clock on the wall. I should go, he said reluctantly. This could get heated, and I'd rather be there from the start. Of course. Margaret smiled. Thank you for dinner. Cole hesitated, then reached across the table to take her hand. Margaret, when this issue is resolved, there's something important I'd like to discuss with you. Something personal. Her heart fluttered. I'll look forward to it. He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. I'll walk you back to your shop. The evening air was pleasantly cool as they strolled down the main street. Most businesses were closed, and the town was quieter than usual with so many men at the meeting. They had nearly reached the dressmaking shop when Margaret noticed a figure lurching toward them from the shadows of an alley. Well, ain't this cozy? Slurred a familiar voice. Vernon Miller stepped into their path, swaying slightly, his bloodshot eyes fixed on Margaret with malevolent intensity. Cole moved protectively in front of her. Evening, Miller. You're looking a bit worse for wear. Vernon ignored him, pointing an unsteady finger at Margaret. You think you're too good for me, but you'll spread your legs for Clayton quick enough, won't you? Margaret flinched at the crude words. Cole's posture stiffened, but his voice remained controlled. You're drunk, Vernon. Go home before you say something you'll regret. Already regretting plenty, Vernon sneered. Like wasting $50 on a fancy Boston whore. Cole's patience visibly snapped. He grabbed Vernon by the shirt front, lifting him slightly. Apologize to the lady. Now. Vernon's hand went to his belt, and Margaret gasped as she saw the glint of a knife. Cole, he's armed. Cole released Vernon and stepped back just as the smaller man lunged forward with the blade. The knife caught Cole's sleeve, slicing through fabric and skin. Blood immediately darkened the white material. Enraged by the sight of Cole's blood, Margaret grabbed a broom that was leaning against a nearby storefront and swung it with all her might. The handle caught Vernon across the shoulders, sending him sprawling face first into the dirt. Before Vernon could recover, the town marshal appeared, drawn by the commotion. What's going on here? Marshal Jenkins demanded, taking in the scene Vernon prone in the street, Cole's bloodied arm, Margaret still clutching the broom. Miller pulled a knife on Clayton, called a witness from the boardwalk. The marshal hauled Vernon to his feet, confiscating the knife. That'll be a night in my jail, Miller. Attacking a man with a knife is serious business. As Vernon was led away, still hurling insults, Margaret turned to Cole. You're hurt. Let me see. It's just a scratch, he insisted, though the spreading bloodstain suggested otherwise. Don't be stubborn.
Come to my shop.
I have a first aid kit. In the light of her shop, Margaret examined the wound, a shallow but long cut along Cole's forearm. She cleaned it carefully with water and whiskey, then applied a salve she kept for sewing injuries before bandaging it neatly. You handled yourself well out there, Cole said as she worked. Not many ladies would have waded into a knife fight with a broom. Not many ladies had to deal with men like Vernon Miller, she replied, securing the bandage. Besides, I couldn't very well stand by while he attacked you. Cole caught her hand as she finished. Thank you for the medical attention and the rescue. You're welcome. Their eyes met, and Margaret felt that now familiar warmth spread through her chest. "Though I think your meeting has started without you." Cole glanced toward the town hall, then back at her. "Some things are more important than meetings." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken feelings. Then Cole leaned forward slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished. Margaret didn't move away. Instead, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips gently against his. The kiss was tender, almost reverent, Cole's hand coming up to cup her cheek with exquisite care. When they parted, both were slightly breathless. "I should go," Cole said reluctantly. "The meeting? Yes, you should go," Margaret agreed, though she made no move to step away from him. Cole smiled, touching her cheek once more. "We'll finish this conversation soon." As he left for the meeting, Margaret touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. Despite the ugly confrontation with Vernon, her heart was lighter than it had been in years. For the first time since her parents' death, she felt that maybe, just maybe, happiness was within her reach again. The town meeting lasted well into the night, with heated arguments from both sides of the dispute. Cole's voice of reason eventually prevailed, and a temporary compromise was reached. The homesteaders would remove fences from the established cattle trails, while the ranchers would respect the farmers' property rights elsewhere. A more permanent solution would require territorial legislation, but for now, violence had been averted. When Cole finally returned to his room at the hotel, exhausted but satisfied, he found himself thinking not of the meeting's outcome but of Margaret, her courage in facing Vernon, her gentle hands tending his wound, the softness of her lips against his. He had planned to wait longer before declaring his feelings, to give her more time to adjust to her new life in Willow Creek. But their encounter with Vernon had crystallized something in his mind. Life was unpredictable, and tomorrow was promised to no one. The next morning, Cole woke early and headed straight for Margaret's shop. She was just unlocking the door when he arrived, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "Good morning," she said, unable to hide her pleasure. "How did the meeting go?" "Better than expected. We found a temporary solution that most can live with." He gestured to the shop. "May I come in? I'd like to have that personal conversation now, if you're not too busy." Margaret nodded, suddenly nervous. "Of course." Inside, the morning sun streamed through the front windows, illuminating the neatly arranged fabrics and sewing supplies. Margaret set her shawl aside and turned to face Cole, who seemed uncharacteristically uncertain. "How's your arm?" she asked to fill the silence. "Healing well, thanks to your care." He flexed it slightly to demonstrate. "Margaret, what I wanted to discuss. I had planned to wait longer, to give you more time, but after last night..." He took a deep breath. "I find myself unwilling to waste another day without telling you how I feel." Margaret's heart pounded so loudly, she was certain he must hear it. "And how do you feel, Cole?" "I love you." The words were simple, direct, spoken with the same honest clarity he brought to everything. "I think I began falling in love with you the moment you stood up to Vernon Miller at his cabin, refusing to accept less than you deserved. Every day since has only deepened those feelings." Tears sprang to Margaret's eyes, surprising her. She hadn't realized how much she had longed to hear those words, not from just anyone, but from this man who had shown her nothing but respect and kindness since the moment they met. "Cole, she hesitated, caution warring with the emotions flooding her heart. "You don't need to say anything now," he assured her quickly. "I understand your hesitation. After what happened with Miller's deception, you have every right to be careful with your trust." "It's not that I don't trust you," Margaret said, finding her voice. "I do trust you, more than I've trusted anyone in a very long time. It's myself I'm uncertain of. I came west with such naive expectations, such foolish dreams." "There's nothing foolish about seeking happiness," Cole said gently. "And your dreams weren't wrong, just the man who claimed to fulfill them." Margaret took a step closer to him. "When I first arrived in Willow Creek, I thought I'd made the worst mistake of my life. Now I'm beginning to think it might have been the best decision I ever made." Hope flickered in Cole's eyes. "Does that mean—" "It means I love you too," Margaret said, the words bringing a sense of rightness, of coming home. "I wasn't looking for love when I came west, but somehow it found me anyway." Cole closed the distance between them, gathering her in his arms with a tenderness that nearly undid her. Their second kiss was deeper than the first, filled with the promise of a shared future. When they finally parted, Cole kept his arms around her waist, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. "Margaret Williams, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need a husband or because I need a wife, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Margaret looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." Joy spread across Cole's features, making him look younger, almost boyish in his happiness. He spun her around once, both of them laughing, before setting her gently back on her feet. "I should warn you," he said, suddenly serious. "Ranch life isn't easy. There are hard seasons, lean years." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Margaret replied. "And I won't stop being a seamstress. My shop is important to me. I wouldn't expect you to give it up. We can work out the details, maybe divide your time between town and the ranch." He took her hands in his. "All I know is that I want to build a life with you, whatever shape that takes." "When?" Margaret asked, practical concerns beginning to surface through her happiness. "When should we marry?" "As soon as you're ready. Tomorrow, or next year, it's your decision." Margaret considered. A long engagement was traditional, but she had already broken with tradition by coming west alone. And after the uncertainty of the past months, the idea of security, of belonging to someone who truly cared for her, was powerfully appealing. 1 month, she decided. Time enough for proper preparations, but not so long that we'll drive ourselves mad with waiting. Cole's smile was answer enough. News of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. Most people were delighted Cole was well respected, and Margaret had made a favorable impression during her short time in Willow Creek. Only Vernon Miller, upon his release from jail, voiced bitter objections, but his complaints were largely ignored. He left town shortly thereafter, reportedly heading for the silver mines in Nevada. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Margaret continued working at her shop while making preparations for her new life at the ranch. Cole began renovations on the ranch house, updating rooms that had remained unchanged since his mother's death. Matthew Clayton proved an enthusiastic supporter of the match, confiding to Margaret that he'd never seen his brother so happy. "He's been lonely a long time," Matt told her. "Since Mary and the baby died, he's buried himself in work. You've brought him back to life." Mrs. Gunderson was equally approving, though she expressed it differently. "About time that boy found himself a wife," she declared while helping Margaret inventory household linens. "The house needs a woman's touch, and he needs someone to remind him there's more to life than cattle." The wedding took place on a perfect late summer day at the Clayton Ranch. The ceremony was held under the oak tree where Cole had first confessed his admiration for Margaret. Friends and neighbors gathered to witness the exchange of vows, and even the territorial judge traveled from the county seat to officiate. Margaret wore a gown of ivory silk that she had worked on secretly in the evenings, incorporating lace that had belonged to her mother. As she walked toward Cole, a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands, she felt not the nervousness she had expected, but a profound sense of rightness. Cole watched her approach with undisguised adoration, handsome in a new suit that Margaret had insisted on making for him. When she reached his side, he took her hand as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Dearly beloved," the judge began, his voice carrying across the assembled guests. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Cole James Clayton and Margaret Elizabeth Williams in holy matrimony. The traditional words washed over them as they stood together beneath the spreading branches of the oak. When it came time for their vows, Cole spoke clearly, his voice steady with conviction. "I, Cole, take you, Margaret, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." He squeezed her hand gently as he added, "And I promise you this, I'll never leave you. Not for any reason, not for any hardship. Where you are is where I belong." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes at the addition to the traditional vows, so simple, yet addressing her deepest fear. When it was her turn, she added her own promise. "I, Margaret, take you, Cole, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. And I promise to trust in our love, to believe in our future, and to remember always that home is wherever we are together." The exchange of rings followed, a simple gold band for Margaret, a matching one for Cole. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Cole's kiss was tender but thorough, drawing good-natured cheers from the assembled guests. The celebration continued into the evening, with food, music, and dancing. As twilight descended, Cole led Margaret away from the festivities, back to the oak tree where they had been married hours earlier. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist as they looked out over the valley that was now their shared home. "More than I ever thought possible," Margaret admitted, leaning back against his chest. "When I stepped off that stagecoach and found Vernon Miller instead of the man he pretended to be, I thought my life was ruined. I never imagined that same day would lead me to you. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes," Cole said thoughtfully. "If Miller had been honest, you'd be his wife now." Margaret turned in his arms to face him. "I can't imagine that life anymore. This you, the ranch, our future together, this is where I'm meant to be." Cole kissed her again, lingering and sweet. "Come on, Mrs. Clayton. I believe they're expecting us for the last dance." "Mrs. Clayton," Margaret repeated, savoring the sound of her new name. "I like the way that sounds." Hand in hand, they walked back to their wedding celebration, both knowing that while challenges surely lay ahead, they would face them together. The first year of marriage brought adjustments for both Cole and Margaret. They settled into a routine that allowed Margaret to continue her dressmaking business while fully embracing her role as Cole's wife and partner in ranch operations. 3 days a week, she worked at her shop in town, with Cole often driving her in the morning and picking her up in the evening. The other days, she worked from a sunny room in the ranch house that Cole had converted into a sewing studio. Winter came early that year, with heavy snows isolating the ranch for weeks at a time. Margaret discovered the harsh realities of frontier life during these months: the constant battle against the elements, the worry over cattle surviving the cold, the precious nature of supplies when town was inaccessible. But she also discovered unexpected joys: evenings by the fire with Cole, reading aloud or simply talking, learning to bake bread under Mrs. Gunderson's patient instruction, the breathtaking beauty of the snow-covered landscape at sunrise. Spring brought new life to the ranch, calves being born, wildflowers emerging from the thawing ground, and the news that Margaret was expecting their first child. Cole's reaction to the announcement was everything Margaret could have hoped for. His face lit with joy, then softened with tender concern as he gathered her in his arms. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." There was a moment of shadow in his eyes, memory of his first wife and child, lost in childbirth, but it passed quickly, replaced by determination. "We'll get the best doctor in the territory. Whatever you need, whatever it takes to keep you both safe." Margaret placed her hand over his heart. "We'll be fine, Cole. I promise." As her pregnancy progressed, Margaret found herself surrounded by care and support. Mrs. Gunderson hovered like a protective hen, ensuring Margaret ate properly and rested adequately. The ranch hands treated her with an almost comical deference, as if she might break at the slightest touch. And Cole was attentive without being smothering, sharing her excitement while quietly managing his own fears. By mutual agreement, they decided Margaret would stop traveling to town for the last months of her pregnancy. Sarah, her assistant, had proven capable of handling the shop with occasional supervision, and Cole was adamant that Margaret not risk the increasingly uncomfortable journey as her time grew near. On a warm September evening, exactly 13 months after their wedding, Margaret went into labor. The doctor had been summoned earlier that day when her pains first began, but the baby was progressing faster than expected. "The doctor may not make it in time, Mrs. Gunderson informed Cole as he paced outside the bedroom. "But don't you worry. I've delivered plenty of babies in my time." Cole's face paled. "Is she all right? Is there anything I can do?" The older woman's expression softened. "She's strong, your Margaret. And babies have been coming into this world since long before doctors were around to help them. Just keep praying." Inside the bedroom, Margaret fought through each contraction with determination. The pain was intense, but between waves, she found strength in thinking of Cole, his love, his support, the family they were creating together. "I can see the head," Mrs. Gunderson announced eventually. "One more good push, Margaret." With a final, tremendous effort, Margaret brought their child into the world. The lusty cry that followed was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "A girl," Mrs. Gunderson declared, quickly cleaning and wrapping the infant. "A beautiful, healthy girl." When Cole was finally allowed into the room, Margaret was propped up against pillows, their daughter cradled in her arms. He approached the bed hesitantly, as if afraid this moment of perfect happiness might shatter if he moved too quickly. "Come meet your daughter," Margaret said softly. Cole sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his eyes fixed on the tiny, red-faced bundle. When Margaret placed the baby in his arms, his expression of wonder and love brought tears to her eyes. "She's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the downy dark hair that covered the infant's head. "Just like her mother." "What shall we name her?" Margaret asked, though they had discussed options for months. Cole looked up, his eyes meeting Margaret's. "Clara Elizabeth Clayton," he said without hesitation. "Clara for my mother, Elizabeth for yours." "Clara," Margaret repeated, smiling as the baby's tiny hand curled around her finger. "I think it suits her." The doctor arrived an hour later, pronounced both mother and child in excellent health, and stayed for a celebratory drink with Cole before heading back to town to spread the happy news. As darkness fell, the ranch grew quiet. Mrs. Gunderson retreated to her own quarters after ensuring Margaret and the baby were comfortable. Cole refused to leave their side, pulling a chair close to the bed where he could watch over his family. "You should sleep," Margaret told him, though she was reluctant to close her own eyes, unwilling to miss a moment of this perfect day. "I will," he promised, reaching out to stroke her cheek. "I just want to look at you both a little longer." Margaret smiled, understanding completely. "I love you, Cole Clayton. And I love you, Margaret Clayton. More today than yesterday, and less than tomorrow." He leaned forward to kiss her gently. "Thank you for our daughter, for our family, for saying yes that day in your shop." As she drifted toward sleep, Margaret reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment. The advertisement that had seemed like her salvation. The bitter betrayal upon her arrival. The cowboy who had stepped forward when she needed help most, offering not just assistance but respect. The man who had become her husband, her partner, the father of her child. She had arrived in Willow Creek as a mail-order bride and been betrayed, but fate had led her to a love deeper and truer than anything she could have imagined. And Cole had kept his wedding promise. He had never left her. Not for a moment. Not through any hardship or challenge. As Clara slept peacefully in her cradle and Cole maintained his loving vigil beside them, Margaret knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a husband, but a home, a place where she was valued, respected, and truly loved. The journey had been unexpected, but the destination was exactly where she was meant to be. Over the next 5 years, the Clayton family flourished alongside their ranch. Clara grew into a spirited, curious child with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. When she was 3, a brother joined the family, James Matthew Clayton, a sturdy boy whose birth was considerably easier than his sister's, much to everyone's relief. Margaret's dressmaking business continued to thrive, evolving to meet the changing needs of the growing community. As Willow Creek expanded with the arrival of the railroad, Margaret hired additional seamstresses and began importing finer fabrics from the East. Cole supported her entrepreneurial efforts wholeheartedly, proud of her success and the reputation she had built. The ranch prospered as well, with Cole and Matthew implementing new breeding techniques and expanding their operations. They weathered the inevitable challenges of frontier life, drought seasons, harsh winters, fluctuating cattle prices with resilience and innovation. Through it all, Margaret and Cole's partnership deepened. They were not just husband and wife, but true companions who faced life's joys and struggles as a team. Their different strengths complemented each other perfectly. Cole's practical knowledge of the land balanced by Margaret's keen business sense, his quiet steadiness matched with her creative energy. One evening in their 6th year of marriage, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Cole took Margaret's hand. "Do you ever think about that first day?" he asked. "When you arrived in Willow Creek?" Margaret smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "Sometimes. It seems like another lifetime now. I knew the moment I saw you standing up to Vernon Miller that you were special," Cole admitted. "But I never imagined how completely you would change my life." "We changed each other's lives," Margaret corrected gently. "You gave me a home when I had none, and I gave you a family when you thought that chance was lost forever." Cole nodded, watching as 5-year-old Clara taught her little brother how to make a daisy chain. "We've been blessed." "Indeed, we have." Margaret squeezed his hand. "And do you know what I'm most grateful for?" "What's that?" "That you kept your promise. That you never left me. Not once. Not even when things were difficult." Cole turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I never will, Margaret. That's a promise I'll keep until my dying day, and beyond, if such things are possible." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and purple, Margaret Clayton reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this perfect moment. She had traveled west seeking security and found love, instead a love that had transformed a mail-order bride's disappointment into a life of joy, purpose, and belonging. And in the years that followed, through all of life's inevitable changes, the children growing up, the town expanding, the territory becoming a state, one thing remained constant: the love between a seamstress from Boston and the cowboy who had promised never to leave her. It was a promise kept every day, in both word and deed, creating a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come.